Male allyship usually gets framed as men supporting women, but what happens when the script gets flipped and a man feels he can't say what he thinks because he'll be judged, mocked, or written off before he's even finished the sentence? Today's guest, Carolyn Hobdey, a multi-published author, international speaker, and unapologetic corporate truth teller with 25 plus years leading transformation across leadership, culture, HR, and operations. Carolyn's work focuses on the conversations organizations avoid, the moments where people stay polite, but problems stay put. In this episode, Carolyn's putting a spotlight on male allyship from the perspective you don't hear often, how a woman can speak up for men when they feel they don't have a voice. Because becoming a lightning rod and without being dismissed as a pick-me female. We'll talk about what's actually going on underneath that label, why it gets used, why it shuts down, and how to advocate with integrity. So you're not amplifying harmful behavior, but are making space for honest human conversations that actually move culture forward. If you lead people or you care about building workplaces where everyone can speak without fear, this one will land. Carolyn, welcome to the Leading Boldly podcast.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you very much for that. It's wonderful to be here.
It's really great to have you here.
It's great to have you here. When our friend Steve said, you have to speak to this woman, and Steve's been on the podcast before. So we had a chat, and I think we could have chatted for 3 hours back then. So we'll try and keep it not 3 hours for our listeners, but I know it's going to be great.
Yeah, and in a previous episode, we've had the other side of the coin. So it's really great to have you on to show the opposite side.
Yes, we had a male, Lee, coming on to talk about female allyship and being a male ally for women. And we're going to talk about a bit of the opposite. But before we do that, we're going to get into your history. What was it like being a child, Carolyn?
Oh, gosh, I think that child Carolyn had a pretty tough time in her own head, I think. I now know that I'm an empath. Back then, wouldn't have known that at all. I think that I feel deeply, and back then I didn't have the words for those emotions. So I found that quite challenging, I think, because I felt deeply, but I didn't know what it was that I was feeling, or why I was feeling it, or how to say what I was feeling and to connect with other people as a result of that. So in some ways, you roll that forward, and I think that connects to what it is that I do today in the championing of men, because I think that men in particular aren't encouraged to explore those feelings, those emotions, and put names to them and labels and understand what they are. And I think I can relate to that from being a child, but I guess I learned those skills over time.
Did you have healthy male role models when you were a child?
I had the most healthy male role model possible in my dad. And I quite often say I think that my dad ruined men for me in general, in as much as I thought that thanks to my dad, I thought that all men were amazing. I thought they were all kind and courteous and respectful and thoughtful and generous. Yeah, I could go on in terms of the words. So I had the most fantastic male role model. I talk about my dad a lot, in throughout the work that I do. He's absolutely my hero, and I do tell him that. So yeah, he was amazing. I think that the world taught me a pretty harsh lesson when I went out there and interacted with it and discovered that not all men are like that.
No, not all men are, but a lot are. I've had very similar experience to you, where I've had massively positive male role models in my life, like my dad. And there have been some negative too, because I think that's just the same with every gender. There's some really amazing women and there's some really horrible ones.
Yeah, definitely.
How was it being? How did you find school? Did you enjoy school? Did you not enjoy it?
It was a mixed experience for me. It took me quite a long time. In fact, it took me well into my adulthood, really, for me to accept, appreciate that I was quite smart. Um, and so I think generally at school I did pretty well. Academically, I would say. I don't think that was the moment where I hit my full potential by a long stretch. I think that did happen more into my adulthood when I got more into my stride. In general, it was okay. I was bullied a bit at school. I know that happens for a lot of people, and some don't experience it at all. Um, I think that it, yeah, like most people, it was quite a shaping experience, I think, in terms of speaking up and then finding out that that's not always what people want from you, that they sort of want you to smile sweetly and sit in a nice box. And I think that's I sometimes struggled with that. Um, but in general, I would say it was relatively successful for me, I think.
Just really interesting for us because I think all, particularly entrepreneurs and the people on this podcast, have difficult times at school, some of them, and then others have just said no, it was great, it was a total breeze. So it's always interesting to see where everybody lands with it, because I think our brains just work quite differently to how the school system would like us to be, and that just comes out in different ways. And a bit like yourself, I was the one that always would speak up and then think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, I think I was probably just generally as an individual, I'm a passionate individual, reasonably feisty. Um, that didn't get me into trouble. At school, I was very well behaved, pretty compliant from that point of view, would want to do right, get things correct. I think that perfectionism, though, was a little bit of a double-edged sword, I think, because I would try incredibly hard to do things right, and work probably harder than I actually needed to in many respects. But I think I'm relatively successful, I would say, for me. But there were times that I would say it was punctuated with where maybe with my peer group, I didn't fit in quite as well as I could have done.
What did you do after you left school?
So I went to uni. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just did what I loved, and English was what I loved. So I went to uni and I studied actually English and Creative Studies, which was a new course for the uni that I went to as well. What was lovely about that is it broadened it out into creative writing, philosophy, drama. So it was quite multifaceted, but with obviously an underlying emphasis on English literature. But I loved it. I loved a bit of creative writing. I loved drama. I'd done that at school. So it was, quite varied. And decided to do what I loved because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do.
And you spent a long time in corporate, didn't you?
I did.
So what got you into corporate, and what sort of, it was HR based?
It was, and I mean these days, at the risk of sounding very ancient, these days, like people choose HR as a career. Back when I got into HR, like most other people, I sort of fell into it. It wasn't like a specific career choice back then.
Yeah.
Now there's degrees in it and people choose it, and it's much more recognized. I left uni and I got just a sort of a temporary job because I just needed to get a job, earn some money. And it was actually through that they had an HR manager there who again was probably, I think, the only woman at any kind of senior level, which became a little bit of a thing in my career as well. And I just got quite interested in what she did. Used to have some good conversations with her. And so beyond that, I then specifically looked for an HR job. And I did not know how lucky I was that I happened to get an HR job at Unilever, and I didn't know who Unilever were. I mean, I obviously once I got there, understood like so many products. They used to boast that it was like the huge percentage of homes that had a Unilever product in them, but as a brand and as a name, I didn't know who they were. But I managed to land this job, and it just took off from there. I had, you go back to positive male role models. My line manager in that job was a man, and he was awesome. And he absolutely, for me, set my blueprint, not just from an HR point of view, because actually, interestingly, he wasn't from an HR background, and Unilever used to do that very, very well in terms of moving people into the right role, not necessarily like their core discipline. He was amazing. He was an amazing role model and a fantastic coach and mentor to me. And that really set the blueprint for me.
I'm interested in large corporate HRs, and particularly as it was your first kind of foray into it. What was Unilever HR like? Because we tend to see that they either are very much the disciplinarian department, that's how they operate, or they're really proactive on brand culture and nurturing human stories. What was Unilever like?
I think my impression was that it possibly that the answer to that differed a little bit depending on where you worked within Unilever, potentially a little bit. Where I was within the organization was definitely the latter of those two, really people focused, very caring. I worked on the Lever Fabergé side of it. So that's the bit from the Lever brothers where their entire ethos had been about, actually, if we look after these people, they become more productive, they're happier, they're sick less often, we get more out of them, but in a positive way. I grew up on that side of the business, and that was very, very much still the case. You know, those values, that sense of, if we do right by our people, they will do right by us. Attitude was definitely there. And I stand by that so much today. You know, it drives so much of the work that I do now, and the way that I approach things of, you know, just looking after your people, they will pay that back in spades. And so that was the experience for me. I mean, you know, did we have to discipline people? Of course we did. You know, I did plenty of that. You know, there's always the hiring, the firing. But we had a very positive relationship, for example, with the trade union on site, a very collaborative relationship with them. And it was all about how we do right and do the best by the people, but with a view to that will get us results, it will get us success, it will get us delivery, and it did in spades. We were very successful as a site.
Amazing. Great. And how did that sort of early experience sort of start to form what you're doing now?
I think it shaped so much about how I led people myself. I think it shaped a lot about my views of leadership then also in general. The fact of understanding how you get the best out of people, I think, was really the fundamental part of it. I worked, that site was quite mixed in terms of a male female mix. There was actually quite a lot of women in the factory, in manufacturing, because in the past it had been a very dexterous job back before it was automated as much as it was by the time I was there. So there was a heavy sort of female contingent, certainly in the factory workforce, because of the dexterity that was needed, and women are naturally more dexterous than men. At a leadership level, it was, again, you know, reasonably mixed, but fairly male dominated. It was probably the environments that I went on to from there that were much more male dominated in a manufacturing side. So it developed my real passion for manufacturing, which I'd also got from my dad, actually. And so I had that passion for manufacturing. Subsequently, though, the organizations I went to were much more male dominated than Unilever was.
And how did you find those spaces?
Tricky. I think that I experienced what a lot of women experience, and I think the balance as well was that not only was I a woman, to state the obvious, but also I worked in HR. So you're sort of got a challenge on both fronts, because you're seen as a woman and therefore soft. And for anybody that's worked in HR, they will absolutely tell you it is a long way from soft. I've had more tricky conversations, more difficult conversations, more combative conversations, more tragic conversations that you can't tell anybody about, than any of my peers in any other function, and indeed my male peers for that as well. I think that you then, you have that female bit, you have the HR bit, which also then people go like, oh, it's like it's soft and fluffy and it's people stuff. And it's like, no, I've just this week alone, I've dealt with somebody who's been diagnosed with a terminal illness, somebody that's had a miscarriage, and disciplined somebody, all in the same week. But most of that I can't tell anybody about. So yeah, if you think it's soft, then yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah.
So you have
anything
both
but
sides.
fluffy. Yeah.
Anything but fluffy. Sometimes you're craving some fluffy, desperately. However, it's in a male intensive environment, you're, like I said, battling on both fronts really.
Mm. Being an empath and having to take all that on and not having an outlet, how did you let that out? Because you have to in some way.
You do. I think for a lot of years, in all honesty, I probably didn't really.
Mm-hmm.
I think that certainly at some points in my career was everything. So I was sacrificing quite a lot outside of work in favor of work. So long hours, thinking about it a lot, taking my work home with me. I happened to be married to somebody that also had a big career and was very driven. So on the one hand, it was brilliant because that person understood how important my work was and the hours and the dedication I put into it. But at the same time, it meant that there wasn't really checks and balances in place either. So I sacrificed quite a lot. And I think for a long time, I didn't have those outlets. I didn't have that sense of balance. And I can remember, I was in my probably mid to late 20s, and having a conversation actually with my mum, who said to me a couple of times, she said, I think that's an awful lot for someone of your age to be dealing with. And at the time, you're just like, oh, well, it's just the job, and you shake it off. But when I reflect on it now, she was right. I was dealing with some really heavy human stuff at really quite a young age. And
without good training.
Yeah. And so I had, that I had that role model, like I said, at Unilever, and some great colleagues that sat around me. But when I left that environment, and certainly the next job I went to after that, I think was a real baptism of fire of being standalone, not having the support in place, being the main expert, being considerably younger than my peer group, being the only woman. It was pretty intense, certainly at that point in my life, and I didn't have the support mechanisms at all.
How did that manifest, or did it?
I think I left that job sooner than I wanted, sooner than I probably had planned in my head. But because of some of the things that went on there, I reached a point where I thought my work here is done. It's been incredibly intense. I have set it on a path to change and improvement, but that had come at huge personal cost to me, physically and mentally, really. So I stayed there for a couple of years, which I think I would have thought, well, I'll be there sort of 3 to 5 years. And I just had to move on in the end, but not through a sense of failure, but really it's like, right, I've battled a number of things. I have faced some really significant stuff, and I've got it to a point where if I'm going to step away, this is probably the right moment, and so I did. But that was really, I was quite wrung out at that point.
Yeah. I want to talk about your books. So you have an amazing set of books called the Twat trilogy, although number 3, I think, is in process, not done.
It is.
Again, I just loved that when I saw it. I thought, yep, that's my kind of woman. So tell us what led to that, why it's called that, and what it's about.
So, yes, I have 3 books. But the confusing bit in those is that they're not in themselves the trilogy. So 2 of the books of the trilogy, another one is a book that I wrote in between the first and the second book of the trilogy. So they came about after my world imploded in 2018. So I lost everything. really in 2018. So in the space of 10 days, I lost my job, I lost my relationship, and with that, my stepchildren and my home in the space of 10 days. So it was a pretty dark time, to say the least. And it, in many ways, has sort of been a long time coming, but I didn't know that at the time, when I was in it. And I went to therapy. I went into therapy. I had therapy for quite some time. And I mean, I'm quite open about the fact that things must have been pretty bad because they gave me a clinical psychologist. So, not just any old like counselor. They were like, you need the top dog, love. So I had some quite intensive therapy for about 9 months, actually. And people often ask, were the books the therapy? And it's like, no, they absolutely weren't. I went to the therapy, and it was during the course of that, really, because they gave me this clinical psychologist who was wonderful, very experienced. And I think it was during some of that where I thought, here's somebody who's probably seen a lot, heard a lot, been there, done it, had it sit in front of them. And there were several times when she was quite open mouthed, as I sort of then this happened to me, and then that happened to me. And she was a bit open mouthed. And I think I just had that moment where I was like, oh. And she would quite often stop me and go, hang on a minute, right, rewind, let's unpick what you just said, because you've just skipped over that. Like, it was like, this is something that happened to me in my life. So it was that really where I thought, there's quite a lot in this. Clearly quite a lot has happened to me that I'm just sort of skipping through it and going, so these are a list of things that have gone on in my life to this point. And I think it was that where I thought, I probably should sort of write some of this down. And I started to think, if I wrote some of this down, that maybe it would help other people. And also when my world caved in, I just had to navigate my way out of that as best I could. And so the book that I wanted to write originally was the second book of the trilogy, as it turned out, because that was when you're in a dark place and your life has sort of gone to chaos, how do you navigate your way out of it? So I wanted to write that, which was De-Twat Your Life. Although it wasn't called that at the time. So that was the book I wanted to write. But then I had a conversation with somebody about sort of writing this book, and they were like, you're going to have to write your backstory so that people understand how you ended up there and at that point. So that's when I thought, right, I'll write down the backstory, all the stuff I'd been sort of saying to my therapist, unpicking all of that, which I had through her. And that's how it started. In terms of the title, I was then struggling like mad to think, what do I call this? Like, what is it? What is the title of the book? And it was a wonderful, wonderful friend of mine who I'd worked with, actually, and was just moaning really about, I don't have a title for my book and don't know what to call it, and maybe this and maybe that and whatever. And he just said to me, well, kind of, what is it about? And I just said, well, I guess really it's about all the twats I met along the way. And he just paused and went, well, there you go. That's the title. And I was like, no, I can't put out a book with that on the front cover. And so I went away and thought about it. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought that kind of does feel right. And I went to my publisher and said, I've been grappling with the title. How about this? Expecting, if I'm all honest, that he would go, like, absolutely no way, you can't publish that. And he was like, I love it. I absolutely love it. It says everything about the book. Let's do it. And that's when it turned into the Twats trilogy, because the second book was the book I wanted to originally write. The first book was the backstory to it, and actually in and of itself took on a life of its own. In amongst all of that, I had all this corporate career that just couldn't fit, because the book would have been like War and Peace. And we decided in the end that apart from where it was needed to sort of tell the backstory, we'd strip out the corporate life and make that a separate book. And that's the one that I'm partway through writing, which is Twats at Work. So that's the third book of the trilogy. So that's how it came about.
It's great. And I mean, a lot of that, I was laughing when you were talking about therapy, because I've been in exactly that situation where my therapist has just been sat there going,
yeah,
what? And I skipped over it like you, and then wrote a book, because you're like, okay, well, let's share this with other people, because there must be other people going, what do you mean I've made the therapist open mouthed? Like, how often does that happen? It can
Yeah.
happen that often, but it's I think we're kindred spirits here. How did it feel after you'd written the book and you got it out there and people started reading it?
It's kind of slightly surreal, I always think. You sort of get into the process of writing it, don't you? And then you get really, you'll know this yourself, is that you get really involved in the process of, getting it published and getting it out there and, doing some PR and all of those kind of things. You don't really sort of contemplate that actually anyone's going to read it. And I think not least because I never necessarily had the arrogance that anybody would. And so then people start reading it, and you start getting feedback. And so for a long time, you're in the sort of PR and I was, radio and TV and talking about the book and the contents and obviously various bits of the story, depending on what the angle was of the person interviewing me. And you're sort of in that bubble for a while. And then it starts to land that people are reading it. Obviously, people that I knew read it. My dad read it, which I think I'd never really contemplated that my dad would read it. Like, oh, okay. I mean, God love him. He normally falls asleep just reading the newspaper. So the fact that he made it through the whole book was quite an achievement in itself. I think that then it was the strangers. I think you'll probably have experienced that. So it's the strangers that then get in touch that go, I've read your book and this is what happened to me and this is why it resonated and thank you for saying it out loud or making me feel less alone and it's those things that really impact you, that somebody who you've never met, never seen reaches out. I mean, the most interesting one is I did have a prisoner that wrote to me, having seen me on the telly and then got hold of a copy of the book. His letter was quite interesting. It started with like he'd woken up that morning to the sounds of the Alsatians barking. I didn't sort of realize until I carried on reading that he was telling me that that's because he was in a prison environment. So some interesting things happened like that. However, it was the people that got in touch and said, I read your book and it really resonated and it's really helped me, that you feel very humble, I think, at that point.
It is a really amazing moment that you kind of put everything out there and help somebody by doing that.
Yeah, I had a gentleman who emailed me and so part of my story is that my husband, my very wonderful husband, who I emphasize every time, my now ex-husband, who I have a fantastic relationship with, he's a wonderful person and we are very good friends. My husband was gay, and that's part of my story, and why we're not married anymore. And I wrote about that, obviously, and the impact of that in my book and how that sort of transpired and how that made me feel, and what that did at the time. And I had this wonderful man who was in his 70s that wrote me an email and said, that was me. I was that man. I married a woman who I loved very deeply, but I was hiding this secret. And I think that probably out of all of them moved me more than anything else. Because if from a generational point of view, someone being brave enough of that generation, now it's very different, thank goodness. This is very different and people are able to talk about it and be more open about it, even though people still struggle. But of that generation, it was a very, very, very different prospect. And the fact that he read the book and wrote to me was, really meaningful.
So would you say the first book sparked a new mission for you?
I think that I thought that it did, in as much as I thought at that point, oh, this is about women. This is about advocating for women and speaking up in relation to how it is to be a woman in the world and in relationships in particular, probably with the first book, and a lot of the relationship, in fact, probably every relationship I've ever had has been toxic in some way, shape or form. And I thought that was what it was about. So it's a really good question because I think I thought that was where I was at. And then it turned on its head when I realized it wasn't about women. It was actually about men.
Was there a particular catalyst for that realization, or was it a sort of a cumulative thing?
I think it's been cumulative over a number of years, but
Hmm.
really only in the last even 18 months
Hmm.
that I'd say it's really sort of come to a head. And I say all along, and even in relation to the book at the time when I wrote it, probably men have been like my Achilles heel, and I think that's both personally and professionally. I talk about them being my passion, in all sorts of ways, and I I think that's always been there. And what I've realised is that I sort of I sort of become a champion for men and for the role that they have. But I think more so in the last couple of years, realizing how society has moved and changed. And I think that it's become a really tough place for men to be. And
Hmm.
that is an evolution rather than just an aha
Hmm.
moment over a long period of time. But certainly in the last 18 months, I'm like, this is really hard for guys. For women, we haven't made it in terms of equality, but my God, we've really have come a long way, and we've sort of almost made it. But it's now really starting to feel that we're doing that at the expense of the guys, and I don't like that. That's not a movement I want to be part of.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel the same about that. I just wanted to ask, what did your ex-husband say about you writing about him in the book?
I spoke to him before I wrote the book and said, I'm moved to do this, and I don't know what will happen or whether I'll ever publish it or how far I'll get or what it will mean. But I want to write this book, and I want to be really honest. I almost want to leave no skeletons in the closet, so that almost for me it was that it's like the Daily Mail thing, isn't it? The Daily Mail love to like build you up and then like strike somebody down by trying to find every skeleton in the closet they possibly can. And I sort of had that in mind by going, well, if I put all the skeletons out there, not really anything for anybody to have a go at, albeit that I know that people
Yeah.
lie, they get paid and they lie. But so I spoke to him about that, and he was amazing. He said, I've always said you're a superstar. You go for it. You do
Oh,
whatever you need to do. I think there were times when he regretted that, in that when I was writing it, I would text him sometimes and go, what was the name of that person who? And he was like, oh my God, you're not writing about that, are you? And there would be a bit of that, but he sort of did it with some really good humor. When the book was then out and being published and being promoted, again, I'm so fortunate and so grateful for the relationship I have with him, that he stood up to the plate. We got interviewed together by the Daily Mail, actually, but bizarrely. They interviewed the both of us about our marriage, and the fact that he was a gay man, hiding inside a heterosexual marriage. And we got interviewed together for that, and other things as well. And I don't think there's very many men that would have done that. I really don't. He's a very, very special person, and it's been hard at times for him. I know it has, but he has stood by me every step of the way. And in other ways, in the last 12 months, even on something totally different, he stepped in and he stepped up for me. Yeah, in a way that I couldn't possibly find the ways and the words to thank him.
I love that.
Yeah,
And there's
that's
so many
amazing.
people that just don't understand those kind of wonderful relationships. And I think it's because they don't experience it. I think that it's great that you've had that to experience.
Yes,
Um,
and so many people, when I say like, oh my, you say in conversation, oh my ex-husband, they have that like that, because they're waiting for you to go, and he's a bit of a git, and and all this stuff. And even he, I mean, he actually came to a birthday dinner of mine, and I said to him, look, would you just stand up and like sort of say a few words and thank everybody for coming, and the rest of it? And he did, and he did the most amazing speech, because he's very good at that stuff. And he actually said, for those that don't know like who I am, I'm Carolyn's ex-husband, and I'm the nice twat. Um, and that's how he describes himself. So that's how we see him now, that he's out of the twats in the book. He's the nice one.
I like that.
I want to dive into something you said. and I apologize because I think this is probably a horrible question to have to answer. But
okay, I'm fascinated now.
So you said you touched on the role of men today. Can you articulate what you think the role is? Because I think there are hundreds of thousands of men struggling to answer that for themselves.
And I think that's the point. I think it's very, very difficult to say. I think we are struggling with our definition of what masculinity means. I think we are struggling to understand the place and the role of men. And that's part of why I do what I do and having the conversations that I have, because I think exactly your point. It's a perfect question, because I think at the minute we can't really answer that. And I think that's very difficult. I think it's very difficult for men because they now sort of don't know their place. And this narrative we have around, I hate the smash the patriarchy thing. It makes me shudder. And I think that we are just sort of telling them they're irrelevant. We're making them feel invisible. We're telling them they're negative. And I think that's all generations of men are experiencing that. And so we how can they find a place and a purpose? Because we're sort of doing this thing of, we don't need you. Women don't need you anymore. Like, I can be financially independent, brilliant. I can, have my own job, brilliant. I can, operate in the world without your permission. And I'm talking about obviously sort of, the Western world, as I know it's not the universal truth the world over. And I think therefore we're sort of sitting and men are going, well, what do I bring to that then? Like, where do I fit? And I think a lot of what they're receiving back is, you don't fit at all. I'm sorry, you're over there. And I don't think that's true. And I think that's the dilemma that we have. I don't think there is an answer at the moment to that question. And part of what I want to do, with other people like, Lee, that you've had on, Steve, I think, some of these amazing people, let's help determine the next iteration of what we mean by the role of men and masculinity in and of itself.
Absolutely. Because from my point of view, if you smash the patriarchy, all you're doing is smashing an identity. And when you smash an identity without building a new one, what's left? And I think that is probably the biggest issue right now from my perspective.
It is. I think that men's identity has been eroded, smashed, dismantled, but we're not giving an alternative in terms of helping to rebuild something else. And one of my phrases is, I get that the patriarchy as it stood, and I think that there's a lot about the patriarchy that is misinterpreted and misunderstood, but that's a different conversation for a different day. I think that the patriarchy obviously isn't right now, and it isn't working. It's not the right framework anymore. There are bits of it that are. I think that's the thing. Smashing it and destroying it completely. Let's not do that. Let's have a look at what's working. You wouldn't just, if you bought a house and some areas of it didn't work, you wouldn't knock the whole thing down, would you? And go, let's just start again. You probably would go, well, let's keep the bits that are working and then let's remodel the bits that are not. So I think if we, smashing the patriarchy doesn't work for me. Definitely the matriarchy also isn't the thing. Let's not try and replace everything that's patriarchy with matriarchy and think suddenly that's solving the world for us, because we are still 50-50 in terms of males and females, broadly. So the matriarchy also isn't the thing to replace it with. But I think that's a little bit of, again, some of the narrative that sits with, if we're smashing the patriarchy, it must be that we're replacing it with the matriarchy. So I always say, it's not the patriarchy, it's not the matriarchy, but if we don't rebuild something else, it's going to be anarchy. And I kind of think that's where we are at the moment, because we don't have a suitable, reasonable replacement.
And I think the problem as well is that men just simply cannot do anything right at all. So a lot of the women that are attacking men, and they say they want men to be more in touch with their feelings, more kind, blah, blah, blah. And then their partners come home and express their feelings and cry. And the woman's going, ooh.
Yeah, we don't like that, really.
No, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I say, and I have conversations with men who say, yeah, exactly that, we do the whole, oh, be vulnerable, speak up, say how you feel, say if you're suffering. And we definitely do that when a man takes his life. Oh my God, they should have spoken up. They should have said, we don't create spaces for men to speak up. We don't like it when they do. And I would stand by the fact, and I have this conversation with, male friends of mine and female friends of mine, to be fair, where I also think that even if a woman is strong and independent and, knows what she wants and all those things, kind of does still want to be looked after a bit. And I will absolutely stand by the fact that even those very strong, independent women quite often want to be sort of, not literally, let's be very careful, but I would describe it as, dragged around the bedroom by their hair. They want a bit of caveman in their man. In certain settings.
They definitely do. And it is very, very clear that women still do want that.
They do.
It's millennia of programming. It's not going to be that isn't going to be unwritten in a decade or a couple of decades.
There is a reason that, and I'll emphasize, not read the books, but spoken to many people who have and have watched the films. There's a reason why 50 Shades of Grey was so successful. Because
absolutely.
That kind of, dominant, slightly controlling, women were hot for that. I mean, like hot for that. It was actually articulating quite a lot of what women were wanting. And the reason it did so well is because it hadn't really been said before, but women were like, this is brilliant. Like, treat me like that. So I think that we have to look at all of this stuff in the round and also then go, oh my word, as a guy, must that be confusing? Because on the one hand, we want them to be like growing flowers and doing baking and going, oh, isn't that amazing? And then on the other hand, do want them to be a bit caveman. And I think that men have the potential to be all of those things. I think that's the thing. I think men can be nuanced because I think women are, for exactly the same reason. Women can be really nurturing and that they can also be quite dominant and know what they want and now have the platforms to do that. Also, again, sometimes want a caveman and those kind of things. So I think women are nuanced and are allowed to be nuanced. Men are also nuanced and can be nuanced, but they have, like you say, you're absolutely right, that programming has not been there to sort of allow them to do that. So what we need to do is open up this space to go, you can also be nuanced. It's okay for you to cry and then also step up if, somebody in your life, not necessarily the woman in your life, but, is being threatened in some way, and step up and step in because physically you are likely to be bigger and stronger, and because that's how we're mostly made. And you can actually be all of those things. But I think we've been very black and white with men of you are this or you are that. And I think in the past we've been black and white with women, but over the last few decades, we've allowed women to be, funnily enough, 50 shades of grey. And we now need to offer that same capability, opportunity, platform for men to also be the same.
Absolutely. And it's not just the women that have been black and white. Men have been black and white with each other.
Yes.
For years, you're either a guy's guys or a big girl's blouse. Like, yes. That's the truth of the last, 50 years is that is the black and white guy to guy response.
100%. And I think part of the issue is we need to deprogram guys in relation to guys. I 100% believe in that and agree with you in that, as I understand it, guys will go into a room, whatever the setting might be, but let's say we go into a boardroom, a corporate space, corporate networking, and instantly we're assessing who is where in the pecking order. Where does that hierarchy sit? Who's bigger, stronger, more intellectual, who's more of a protect and provide? And you're right. And then it goes all the way down to, like you say, it's either you're a man's man, an alpha, or you're a big girl's blouse, and we use female oriented phraseology as an insult, and in heavens above, really, if you end up in that other camp. And I think so many men pretend and mask to be in the alpha camp when they're probably not in that, or they are much further down the scale, or along the scale, because it's not down, but further along the scale to being more emotional, more sensitive, but my God, they have to mask that, because otherwise they, yeah, it's like you're then sidelined as weak.
Mm.
And it's such a lot of thinking for men, which is like, this is a lot of thought processes they've got to go through every single day. What can I say? What can I not say? How can I be? How should I not be? How should I act in this situation? How should I act in this situation? I've got to be this in the workplace, but I've got to be this at home. But I've only got to be this at home in this situation. But in this situation, I've got to be this. And I just don't think that we have those same complications quite as women. Like, I think as women, our affliction is that we want to be all things to all people all the time. But we don't have that guessing particularly.
And I think that you're absolutely right. I think both males and females have a mental load, but it's a different mental load.
Yes.
I've had a lot of conversations recently with women where, and with men actually, where they, men don't appreciate the mental load that women have, for example, around their safety. It's the classic thing of the TV program, wasn't it? It was the Gillian Anderson character that said, men's biggest fear in the face of a woman is being laughed at and ridiculed, and a woman's biggest fear is being killed. And that's the difference. And I think that is very, very accurate. And so that in and of itself is a mental load. Women, we know the whole keys between the fingers, scanning the horizon constantly in daylight, in darkness, wherever. And that's a big mental load for women. I totally agree that men's mental load, I think, is getting bigger and bigger. And that's what worries me, because now, I'm not saying there was never a mental load in the past. I think there was. I think, exactly your point in terms of like, well, am I an alpha or am I a big girl's blouse, and which one, there was that. But now I think the complexity of it, the what I can say, what I can't say, will I be cancelled? Will I be judged? If I open my mouth and say something and don't get it exactly right and the terminology exactly right, oh my word, what is going to be the comeback? Because suddenly I'm going to find myself in a serious situation for something that I was just trying my best to do. I think that the mental load for guys is getting bigger and bigger, not least because, again, we're going there, speak up about your mental health. Oh, don't say too much because you might be seen as weak. And also, speak up to, in the workplace, we ask men, say, oh, you can go and speak to HR or go and speak to your line manager or another leader. We're asking them to speak up to the very people who will make decisions or input decisions about their future, their promotion, their development, their career prospects. Why the hell would they go and say, I'm struggling? And I think it's much more acceptable for a woman to go and do that than it is for a man. And I think, like I said, this mental load on men is getting heavier and heavier and bigger at the moment. And that's part of what I want to challenge and address and find some solutions to.
Do you think the large increase in things like burnout and things like that in the corporate sphere actually has maybe more to do with this added mental load of masking and vulnerability and uncertainty than it does with things like hustle culture? And
I do, because I think that it's environmental factors of life in general. I think that that's a lot of the burnout. We can attribute it to work and demands on performing, but I think it's way bigger than that. I think certainly at the moment, I think it's way, way bigger, and it's environmental because, again, the division between work and home, I think, has totally been eroded. We take our work home, it's in the palm of our hand in terms of a technology, it's in our heads, it's so much of our identity, and that's been proliferated, I think. And therefore, that sense of burnout, I think that so much burnout is emotional, not necessarily physical. I mean, obviously it manifests itself physically, but it's not physical burnout from doing really a physical job. Obviously there are people that do physical jobs, and thank heavens for them. Again, this is why I think men are amazing, because, like, quite frankly, I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to go and work on an oil rig, thank you very much. I will leave that to a guy, thank you very much. I don't want equality when it comes to that. So I think that there is so much burden, pressure, data, expectation, so many points of stimulation all the time. I think it's that's causing burnout. And then alongside that, somehow we have to do a job, right?
Yeah,
There's also the
absolutely.
job to do.
Alongside that, we've got KPIs and things to meet.
I think there's also not very many good male role models. Just generally, there just aren't. I don't think there's any balanced male role models, or either one way or the other. And I think that makes for teenage boys an extremely dangerous situation, because they have to choose a camp.
Yes, I think it's so confusing. And I think that's true. I think for so many men, I always say when I do leadership development, there are still our sense of leadership. If we, and again, we've all been in the room, haven't we, where it's like, oh, let's get a flip chart, let's write down what we think a leader is, which I absolutely try to avoid. Oh, here we go. And because what I talk about with people is like, well, if we actually write down again what society accepts as a leader as being, the reality is we describe Donald Trump, we describe Putin, we describe Hitler, and who are actually in and of themselves very successful leaders. Are they leaders that we really want to follow or would want to work for? No, but they are absolutely what we describe leadership as looking like. And yet we also know, I mean, again, I think, these are very successful leaders, so I can't sit there and go they're unilaterally rubbish, because they are really successful at what they do. However, we wouldn't really want to be a Donald Trump or a Putin or a Hitler. I don't think most normal people wouldn't really aspire to that. But when we define leadership, that's still what we actually describe. And I think hence why I'm passionate about leaders and leadership, because we've got to start describing leadership in a different way if we want it to be different. And if we don't want to then think that everything that we hire and promote is that and has those attributes. And we need to start having a different dialogue about what does great leadership look like? What kind of leaders really get the best out of people? And it will take a long time, because we are still hiring and promoting alpha males with bad behaviors, really. Yet we need to then start going, but the ones that really get teams aligned behind them, or are really successful, or retain their talent and promote people beyond their level, and not those ones. But we still have this idea of if we're I've sat in numerous talent succession planning reviews and stuff, and you just hear it, we start there going, well, he's not very assertive, or they're brilliant because they work really long hours, they're really committed. Or probably more likely to hear, yeah, but he's just always out the door on the dot of 5 o'clock, and therefore suddenly like, oh, black mark against them, and it's that. And if we want things to be different, we've got to allow our blueprint of leadership to have a fundamental shift and recognize that totally different things are what actually get the best out of people and get productivity.
And one of the things when we're talking about leadership with any of our clients is some of the best leaders are the moaning people at the water cooler who get all of the staff to follow them and grump and groan about the organization. And they've led all these people down this really negative path. They're brilliant leaders. They might be quiet at their desk, but they get to the water cooler and they can really kind of moan and whinge. And it's quite often women, I hate to say, who, not always, but they are great leaders. It's just that what they're leading towards is a negative outcome rather than a positive outcome. So it's not actually about the style of leadership, it's what you're leading towards that really makes a difference.
Absolutely the case. And I think sometimes with those people, you just sort of have to redirect their energy to, listen to them and redirect their energy to something more positive and more constructive as opposed to destructive. But you're right. I've worked with those leaders where you start off and they're like, maybe not even leaders, like say in terms of role, but they will be part of the workforce that people are following, listening to, can articulate it well, understand the employees, know what the gripes are, and are caught in that pattern. But actually, if you take them and you harness them and go, well, okay, we're going to give you some responsibility, we're going to listen to you, we're going to put you in this role, and you turn them around into something really quite fundamentally transformational to the organization by doing that. And it is that it's understanding that leadership doesn't look one way. And also, I always come at it that, it starts with self-leadership. It's we are all leaders. If we walk, I don't know, walk through the office and there's, some rubbish on the floor, we either step around it or we pick it up. And it doesn't matter if people are noticing or not, somebody will probably be noticing and therefore think, oh, like that's how we behave. That's leadership, and you could be anybody and do that and be leading other people.
Yeah. We all lead other people in some way or form every day. I remember somebody came to me and they were saying, oh, I cannot get this guy on board. He's causing all sorts of obstructions and nobody will do anything because this guy just says this. And he was one of the factory workers. And I said, well, how have you tried to connect with them? What are you talking about? I said, well, you're really good at connecting with people. How have you tried to connect with them? And they hadn't. So as soon as they went to the shop floor and asked about their history and the people around them, it turned out he was from a coal mining family and he'd like all this stuff had happened. And as soon as they got that connection, he could get this guy to do anything and lead the team anywhere because he'd taken the time. And whereas this guy had really gone on the defensive, was being very belligerent, kind of alpha male, old school. And that could have just been knocked off as, oh, well, he's just an old bloke who doesn't know anything. But it wasn't that at all. They just hadn't connected in a way that this guy needed connecting with.
And that's 100% what I'm talking about with men in general in the workplace, because we are going, they're just a dinosaur. They don't understand. And we're not seeking to understand how those men are feeling. And let's be honest, if we look at most organizations and therefore most leaders, unless you're kind of some real sort of entrepreneur techie startup, most of your leaders by that point will be in their 40s and 50s. So they're of a generation where we're kind of caught, I think that generation, we're kind of caught between the really traditional old school managerial type leadership and sort of understanding a little bit, well, some things need to shift, but there's still a lot of that traditional leadership paradigm in there. And I think that we're not listening. We're not listening to those men. We're just telling them that they're crap and irrelevant and going, oh, you're over there, yeah, and you're bad and you're wrong and you're negative. And really what we need to be doing is going, actually, what's this like for you? Talk to us about, that mental load. Talk to us about how it is to be in the workplace for you. Tell us about your fears. Tell us about, what you're having to deal with, and actually listening. And like you say, connection is everything. It's being bothered to listen and find those points of connection with someone, and actually then to a whole sort of generation or swathe of society and community, and going, let's build that understanding with each other. But all we're doing is ramming down their throats the fact that they're crap, and it's all about women, and that's just not true.
Yeah, you're a change maker on a mission of big change. So if I take you 50 years in the future, what change would you like to have seen happen?
I in the first instance, I want to go that we've mastered sort of medical stuff and I'm still here. That would be a kind of change that'd be lovely. I'd like to still be here in 50 years. I think it's unlikely. What I would like, and that's sort of where this all began, is I want workplaces just to be happier, like more pleasant, human. That's really what I want. That's sort of where I think my thought processes began of, if we treat people in a more human way, then we get better stuff out of them. If we are seeing the work, I mean, I know we can dismiss it as a bit of a national pastime where it's like, oh, well, we all moan about work and we all complain about our boss and we all go down the pub and do that, or these days less down the pub and like more just on social media, and moan about it. And I think, I don't know if that is really true. And the reality is that most people do want to turn up and do a good job and be treated right and just have the fundamental boxes ticked. And I just think we can achieve that. We can find purpose, we can find value, we can find a sense of belonging, of worth and community in every person and like every job. And why can't we just sort of do that? And that's the kind of mission. So 50 years from now, I'd just like people to be talking positively about their experience of the workplace because they get treated well. Like, I don't think that's actually in and of itself a revolution. I think it's really basic. And, it's the reason that my leadership development framework is called Simple. And that's an acronym because we have this idea that leadership is really complicated. And it's not, is it hard? Yes, because there's all sorts of vagaries and varieties of people. It's hard, but it's not complicated. And hence why I called it Simple and use that as an acronym, because by doing very little, we can change an awful lot. And I think that's kind of the mission, really. A few small tweaks, boom, the needle suddenly moves and people are there going, yeah, I understand what I contribute. I feel like I'm valued. I feel like I belong. And, not every day is wonderful. And there's parts of my job I don't like. But overall, it's a really positive experience. And I spend a huge amount of my time at work or thinking about work and a lot of my energy on it. But that's great because actually that's quite positive. Like, that's a positive feeling. And that's the outcome for me.
I think we create a society, this is quite a hard question to answer, I think, where there is that genuine kind of balance of mix of people without pushing a whole demographic aside. So like in a workplace, when we see all the very traditional all white male boardroom, like how do we get to shifting that without just saying, right, all the men get out?
Yeah, and I think it's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because I kind of feel that's what's happening, is that and it's hence why I have a huge problem with the term that equality as a term and our attitude to it, because we use equality in a way that says that means that we're going to bring in loads of females and sort of ethnic minorities, etc., etc. And it's like, well, if we actually look at society and think about equality, and and I know it's very difficult because then you sort of stray into gender territory. So for the purpose of this, I'm just going to talk about males and females. But the reality is, society is 50-50, males and females. So if we actually achieve this kind of unicorn of equality, there will still be 50% males in those rooms. But we behave like it's about wiping them out and replacing them with all these other different types, of people, and therefore the men have to be gone. And it's like, no, equality will actually mean that the boardrooms are representative of society, but also maybe even the sort of the demographic of wherever it is that you operate. Because again, that differs around different areas of the country or different types of where you're drawing your pool of people from, and depending on the type of industry you're in as to whether that could be remote working or it literally is the people that live near where you operate. So I think we can achieve it, but I think we've got to be much braver about saying that that's about representative of like society or communities, as opposed to, well, it's got to look like 50% males or females. Well, I've said it before and I've said it again. I don't want to be rescued from a burning building by a 5-foot woman just because we're trying to give her an opportunity. I want to be rescued from a burning building by somebody that can actually lift me up, and I'm 5'6.5". I'm not particularly heavy, but bluntly, I want a 6'5" guy that's going to come and do that and carry me down the ladder because he's the right person for the job. And so I think we have a very warped view of what we think equality means, and I'm a much more of a fan of equity. as a term. I think equity
Yeah.
is where I really champion, because equality, I think, warps our thinking in that we think, oh, well, here's a job and therefore it should be open to absolutely everybody to do that job. And it's like, no, no, it shouldn't, because sometimes physically, mentally, from a demographic point of view, that's not possible.
And also, probably a lot of women don't want to go to sea for 6 months of the year. Yes, some do. And a lot of women don't want to do the fire service. Some do. But you've got a smaller number. So you can't force 50% of the female population to go and do these jobs. You would never force them to go and do the jobs. So similarly, you can't then say, well, in that industry, it's okay, but in that industry, it's not okay. So all of the pictures that we see about this equality are boardrooms.
It's absolutely true.
Few of our businesses.
Yeah, and I think that's very, very true. And also, I think, in fairness, like, men probably don't always want to go and do those roles either. But actually, fair play, they do. And like you said, I don't want to go and work on an oil rig. Thanks very much. It would be cold. It would be dirty. It'd be dark. It would be like miserable for me. That would not be an environment where I thrive. And I think that's the difference. I think we also, though, need to change our mindset around what we think are actually sort of male jobs as well. We do this thing in society where it's like, oh, well, nursing and childcare, that's for women because they are, nurturers. And well, actually, so are men, but we actually sort of tell them that they're not. And again, your point, the big girls blouse thing, or if a guy wants to go and be work in a nursery with children, well, we instantly think he's a paedophile. We have this attitude, don't we? And it's absolutely insane. And I think we also need to change that narrative of men can be very caring, very nurturing. And my goodness, in the society we have today, and this comes with no judgment, it's just where we are, but in some of those nursery settings, it would do so much for those children to have a positive male role model because of the way that families are so fractured and people move around these days. And I mean, the statistics around men losing touch with their children when a relationship breaks down, not necessarily like from their desire, and often not from their desire, is terrible. And so we've got to also change our view of what it's okay, or we deem for it to be okay for men to also go and do, because men can care and be thoughtful and kind and nurturing, and we've got to stop doing this. That makes you a weirdo, or it makes you a risk, or it makes you just wet to want to go and do that. So there's shifts that need to go on in
when I was reading
the
story about the guides and the transgender in being banned in guides, there was somebody, they were saying something about men are still allowed to lead guides, be guide leaders. And so many people in the comments were saying, why would any man want to lead the guides? That's just wrong. That's creepy. It's weird. I was like, this is terrible.
For exactly the same reason that a woman might want to lead scouts.
Yeah.
Why is it okay that way around and not the other way around? I've seen this kind of play out a lot. I started off the very beginning of my career in the entertainment industry, and I've seen that negative gender and other things shift in the opposite direction for sectors and job roles that are traditionally female, such as wardrobe departments within entertainment, and a number of others, where actually it would be the male that would be a white male actually that would be the minority position, but because of corporate tick boxes and DEI policies and stuff, it's still in those roles would be a non-white female that would be preferred for that role, and that is actually the traditional uptake of that role.
Yeah, and I mean the DEI stuff, scrambles my brain really, in that so many things that I've come across in recent times in terms of DEI programs and men trying to sort of go, well, hang on a minute, there's no place for me in this, and them going, oh, well, it's not aimed at you, it's not for you. And that kind of, that wouldn't be very inclusive if we did something for men. And it's like, yeah, it would, because they need it too. They need a forum and they need a play. They deserve to be represented. And I get hugely frustrated that we have this attitude for the law, for example, of the laws are there to protect everyone else from the white male. And it's like, no, no, no. If you read the law, it's there to protect everybody, including the white male, who may well be marginalized in a particular environment or a particular sector, particular company. And you just sort of think, well, we sort of have this sense that it's not for the men. And it absolutely, and I think more and more from what I'm seeing, it really needs to be for the men. We need to provide those environments. We need to provide the environment where, different abilities, different genders, different races, different actually interact with each other. Because so much of it is like almost divisive in and of itself, is that we do things for this group and then we do things for that group. And it's actually so much more of it would be beneficial if we brought the groups together and we created spaces, which is what I try and do for my work, create spaces where we can have the conversations that we avoid, the difficult conversations, albeit that they shouldn't really be difficult. If we come at something with curiosity and we all accept good intent and go, look, I don't know this because I'm not Black, or I'm not a man, or I'm not transgender, but actually, can I ask some questions so I can sort of get it right and I can understand and I can use the right terminology and I can understand how you want to be treated and I can understand how I should speak about you. But instead we just go, oh, you can't say that, you can't ask that, because instantly you get labeled. It's like if you want to ask anybody something about their race, then you're instantly racist. And it's like, no, I'm just actually intellectually curious and trying to do better. And if we took that approach about stuff, then we'd start a dialogue where we would increase our understanding of each other and therefore be less divided. And I don't understand really why DEI stuff seems determined to segment people rather than bring them together.
Absolutely. I mean, we know from, personal transformation and business transformation, the first part of the transformation equation is always awareness, always. And we cannot have awareness unless we're allowed to ask questions without fear of being, shot or beaten down for asking questions, because we cannot have awareness without questions.
100%. And I was on a panel probably over a year ago, and it's something not related to particularly race or gender. It was about sustainability, but there was a young guy on that who was Muslim. And I was sitting next to him on the panel, and we were just sort of chatting about stuff. And he was very, had a very open conversation, which was wonderful. And he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "like where I work." He said he said, "I completely encourage people to ask me questions about my faith and how that operates, and what's okay and what I might be offended by, but in a positive way." He said, because similarly, he said, "I work with a middle-aged woman," and he said, "I don't understand, a white woman," and he said, "I don't understand what that's like either, but we have this fantastic reciprocal relationship where in a safe space, she tells me about what it's like to be a woman, she tells me what it's like to be menopausal, we talk about those things, and she asked me about my faith and my religion and my how I sort of operate in my life, and it's brilliant." And he said, "And we have a fantastic understanding of each other." And away we go. And we were having a conversation about why is it so hard of people to conceive of the idea of having those conversations and that being okay. I just don't understand.
I don't understand either. And I mean, we've met so many people recently from different backgrounds and countries and faiths, and we've had amazingly deep, open conversations with them about their faith and their society. And I coach a really, really wonderful young woman from India, and we talk about cultural stuff and relationships, and she's always so pleased when I ask her the questions. Like she loves it. And I think if we just understand that actually people generally like us to be curious about them, and if we can be a bit more accepting of everybody, and that means everybody, everyone, not this group or everybody but this group. It has to be everybody. I think that's the only way we're going to move forward in humanity without all the stuff, that horrible things that have been happening in our world in the last few years. I know historically it's been going on forever, but at some point, the only way we're going to stop this is by us all being humans together.
I agree. And I think it's that it's the coming at it with the good intent. If you're asking questions with good intent and you receive people's questions with good intent, and I know that probably sounds like, horribly wholesome and straightforward, but I always say that when I work with leadership teams, let's just assume that somebody is doing something with good intent. If they're giving you some feedback, let's assume it's being done with good intent. If you're giving some feedback, do it with good intent. And if we operate on that basis, then all of a sudden the space becomes so much safer, so much more quickly.
And there are some really awful people out there of every single gender and race and makeup that there is. There are really horrible people out there. But there's also so many great people that have been sidelined because of that narrative. Have you personally had any kickback for the work that you want to do?
No. I know of people in my space who say that people have done the whole pick me accusations around them. I've not yet experienced that, and I'm very grateful for that, but I'm sort of prepared that it might happen. Quite the opposite. I have had some wonderful messages from guys in particular saying, this is awesome. We can't say this. We can't say what it is that you're saying because we very much are in that, good. We're glad you're suffering. Men have had it too good for too long. So it's about time, like you had it bad, which I find shocking and just terrible. Like you say, there's no place for that in humanity. So what's interesting is that not always, but majority men that will message me privately because they don't feel able to comment publicly, for example, on a LinkedIn post. And that's still sad. I think that's a sort of, again, a state of society where they don't feel able to speak up and speak out. Sometimes that's been around because I've raised some quite sensitive topics around mental health and suicide and things. And I get that, and people's privacy is their privacy, and that's important. But even just talking about men and championing men in general, I get a lot of direct messages instead of people going, this is awesome. You're onto something. We need you. Please keep going, which is lovely because on social media, I often say, I feel like I'm screaming into a void. You don't always get that feedback. So I've not had the pushback yet. And there's part of me that thinks maybe I'm not being bold enough because, you normally know when you sort of really hit on something where people want to have a go. And don't get me wrong, some of the comments haven't always been very nice. Somebody sort of said, oh, you're just, I think they said like you're attention seeking or, whatever. But not really had anything at all other than thanks and encouragement to keep going.
I had a pick me moment where, because I was sticking up for men and on socials, and someone said, oh, I hope they pick you. And I was like, what are you talking about? I knew exactly what they were talking about, but I just
however, didn't.
Completely. Yeah, no, you had no idea.
Jenny had to explain it to me. I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about.
I was like, have you not seen my profile picture? I literally just got married. I'm pretty okay, thanks. But I don't need every man in the world to fancy me or want to be with me. But I just genuinely think that what you said was a horrible thing to say.
And I think this is the thing. I mean, again, I've got to say on the other hand as well, you see posts, to be fair, from women on LinkedIn where they're like, oh, these like sleazy guys who are sort of sliding into my DMs and propositioning me. I also don't know what they mean by that, because I'm not saying I want it to happen, but it's like, oh, okay, I'm not sure. You start doing that thing, do you? Go, what's wrong with me? Because I've not had that either.
I've had that conversation too. I was like, I've literally never had that happen. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? Oh,
Yeah.
and also with dating, I had brilliant dating experience online. I had no negativity dating online at all.
Oh, well, that's
Um,
probably where we differ. Mine was pretty much universally negative,
yeah. Well, I met Matt
online. So.
online.
And one of my dearest, closest friends, I met him online too. We never dated, like none of that ever happened, but we clicked and we hit it off as friends, and we're now really, really good, close friends. So that was a positive. But yeah, I had some pretty horrible experiences with the online stuff. But yeah, never experienced it on LinkedIn, I have to say. So maybe I just need to try harder to get some to get some of that. I don't know. I maybe try a different tact. I don't
Let's
know.
not put that out into the
Yeah,
universe. You're all good
yeah,
as you are.
yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah.
So what's your next steps?
For me, it's keeping doing what I'm doing. At the moment, I feel like it's kind of I've hit a seam, and I need to keep mining that seam and really understanding what is needed. It's again, again mixing my metaphors. I'm mining a seam, I'm peeling back the layers of an onion. I don't know, you pick whichever is the right one, of just trying to understand, what's needed, what is the dialogue, who am I speaking to. I really, really want to be in organization. I mean, I'm in organizations working with leaders, but quite often in an HR capacity. For me, I want to be getting into organizations, talking to leadership teams, men and women, about, bridging this divide. I talk about bridging the divide between the patriarchy and the wokerati, because I think both of those have a pretty bad press. And we need to be making that better from a generational point of view. I really worry about what leadership is going to look like 20 years from now, when the sort of 20 somethings, who will by then probably be in their sort of more senior leadership positions, if this divide between men and women keeps going, and we keep going, men are negative and crap and irrelevant, and which is obviously putting them on the defensive and making them angry, and it isn't good. How is that going to be when they meet in their 40s on senior leadership teams? I really want that to be different and to change. So for me, it's about getting into organizations, keynote speaking, working with leadership teams, to just have these conversations and start this dialogue and go, right, how can we change that? How can we create an environment here? We can't change the whole of society. I mean, I'd love to in time, but every individual interaction can then have a ripple effect. So I want more ripple effects to happen by having those individual conversations.
Those things also don't just stay in the workplace. They move, like the positive impact there moves into the dating space too. Because men start behaving badly when they feel like they've not got this space, so they fight for it in a way that's really detrimental, because they haven't been taught any other thing. Like, they've not been taught by their mothers, because their mothers often don't have the answers either, or their fathers, because their fathers are a different generation. The teaching's not there, and that is then going to leak into all the relationships. So there are going to be many, many, many more women writing a book about all the twats they've met before. And let's face it, we've all met them. But some of my exes have been pretty twatty with me and gone on to have good relationships. And women spend all the time going, well, he was a twat. Why was that about me? Like, it wasn't about you. You were just not suited for each other.
Yeah.
That's it. You just weren't the right fit. So I think we get, again, as women, we get really bogged down with that person behaved badly towards me, and maybe they did, and then they've gone on and done better things, but a lot of times you just weren't the right relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's true at work. It's true at work, it's true at home, and you're right. For me, a lot of my inspiration, the inspiration around simple as a leadership model, as well, came from Johan Hari's book Lost Connections. And that idea that if we are better connected as human beings, it will improve our lives, it'll improve our mental health, it will improve our lives. And for me, that's inside work and outside work. So if we improve how people are treated and how they feel and how connected they feel and the quality of the conversations, and we're not, like you say, sidelining big swathes of the workplace, then that makes work better. And I want work to be better. I want people to moan less about what their work experience feels like. So if that makes that better, then they carry that home. And if therefore they're going home in a more positive place, they might be tired and they might have had, not everything's going to be rosy all the time. But if generally they feel well treated, they feel heard, they feel like they belong, they feel like they have value and worth, and they will take that home. And by home that might be family, friends, whoever they're living with, hobbies they might have, however they operate in society, total strangers they see on the train home. Then suddenly society gets better because they take that positivity with them, and therefore that environment becomes more positive, and then they bring that back into the workplace because I feel more positive about my life and I'm not so stressed, or I haven't drunk as much, or I've had better sleep, or I've had a really good quality conversation, or I feel less alone and less isolated in my personal life. And then that comes into the work in a positive place as well. So for me, it's that reciprocal cycle that we can improve, which I think is really what it's inspired by. Let's create better connections by better leadership, better conversations, and that will, like I said, it will benefit inside of work, outside of work.
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit today about, how much the lines have been blurred between work and home. And I think our experience of sort of guiding businesses and teams through transformation is the lines are pretty much gone. Like, we spend a lot of our time, particularly with encouraging leadership teams to be bolder in a brand, say, we're dealing with actually relationships from the past with the senior leadership team actually putting in negative beliefs that are preventing them being bold in another area. I think a lot of, the lines are gone in our modern society rather than blurred. I think it's fascinating.
What would you say to any woman that's watching and listening? What could they do to help this situation?
Listen. Actually really listen and be curious. We talked about before, having that curiosity to ask the questions and then listen. And it's a little bit like the campaign a few years ago where it's like, the asking, are you okay? Are you okay really? It's a bit like that for me, of trying to create that safe space and actually understanding that if you just ask and then you ask again, that's not the end of it. With most people that are holding on to something that's difficult to talk about, it will take a lot of times of asking and curiosity and building of a relationship. I've been in, I said, I think probably pretty much every relationship I've had on a personal basis has been toxic in some way, and that's a big part of my history. It is, and a couple of those relationships have been abusive, and they say that in those kind of toxic abusive spaces, it takes 7 times of asking before somebody will step forward or gets the help they need, etc. And I think that's true in so many relationships where you're holding on to something that's difficult. You might not have the words. I think that's the other thing as well. I don't think we equip men, boys, with the right words. So we have to sort of help them, and we have to be willing to give that space and repeatedly give that space to make it safe. So I think that women can do that by knowing that men don't have the same language as we do. They don't have the same permissions as women do to speak about things. They will need patience. They will need several times of asking. And I know that life is hard and it's busy. And so therefore it's like, well, it's easier just to not do it. And I think as well that if you're a woman who then also outside of work has a man in your life, or you're raising sons, or you're maybe you've got daughters and they have boyfriends, whatever that is, however you come across these men in your life, in whatever sphere that is, just take that same approach and observe. I think we have to be willing to see it. And we're very quick to see the patriarchy. We're very quick to see it and point it out and go, oh, well, but actually let's see where it doesn't work for men, where they're struggling, exactly to your point earlier about, are we forcing them to be an alpha male more than they want to be because they're fearful of being the big girl's blouse? Let's see where we're not helping them and do better.
Yeah. And I would implore all women, like if your man comes home and says something sensitive or cries, to just give them a cuddle and listen and accept that instead of feeling that discomfort. And like if a man opens a door for you or offers you a seat, don't take it offensively because you're perfectly capable of opening your own door, because this is where all the confusion happens, because they're like, well, I was just doing a nice thing.
I open doors for people all the time, and nobody ever gets offended by that because I'm a woman. And I do it all the time. I would give up my seat. I tried to do it recently on a train, actually, and and again, we sort of see it like massively offensively. And I completely agree with you that actually we need to notice that women do that stuff too, and it's okay. And I'm just really grateful when somebody does something really nice and offers to help with my bag or give up a seat or whatever, just be nice about it. Yeah, be kind, be gracious, I think is probably the right word.
Yeah, gratitude goes a long way.
Absolutely. Would you give us a quick rundown of your simple framework?
Yes, I can. So it's an acronym. So simple is an acronym. Like I said, it comes from 25 years worth of business, HR, leadership experience. Really what I was trying to do is say, right, how do I come up with a framework that builds the kind of leaders I would have loved to have worked with, worked for, but sadly didn't end up working with and for, although there were some amazing ones. So it was about trying to sort of pull all of that together. And I said, Johan Hari's Lost Connections book really just crystallized it for me, where he has 9 disconnections in that book, and I thought 6 of these actually apply in the workplace, and it suddenly slotted into place that this is what I'd been building, really. So hence why there's 6 elements to it. So the S is self for success, and that always is about digging into, like, who are you? Who are you as a person? Because I firmly believe you can't go out and understand and lead others if you're clueless and no self-awareness about you. So let's start with you and what beliefs you hold and what lens that you see the world with. Because if you understand that, we're not trying to get you to change your lens, but we're just trying to get you to observe it. So that's self for success. There's then improvement with impact. So how do you set your teams up for success? How do you make that, as the small things make a big difference? So that's the I. M is measurement without micromanaging. So trying to get leaders to really understand that idea of stepping away, having a sense of control, having the right measures in place, but then letting people get on with it. So I always say, it's that freedom within a framework approach of going, show them where the boundaries are, but then let people have the creativity. And I think that's really important with different genders and different generations to actually go, we'll show you where the outer edges is, but how you get there, I'm going to give you some freedom in terms of how you get there. P is performance through people. So it's very much saying, how do we disseminate down through an organization? How do we empower people to be able to give their best work, bring value, but also go, okay, I'm not saying that you design every job around a person, because there's certain work that needs to get done, but how can we maximize somebody's skill set as opposed to being too rigid, but also making sure we're communicating well with people and making sure they know what's expected of them. Funnily enough, the L is leading by listening. So how do we really listen to the people around us? How do we pick up on that? How can we emphasize the importance of just listening? And it's such, funnily enough, a simple thing to do. But actually, if we really just listen to someone, often they just want to be heard. And often the anger you get, the fear you get, the aggression you get, the miscommunication you get is because you just haven't listened properly to somebody. And the final one, the E, is environments that engage. So how do we create an overall environment in an organization or within a team that will really allow people to be who they are? So that's a bit about the understanding the difference and the power of difference, and actually making sure that there is a place for all of that, and making sure that, as we've talked about, no particular group feels sidelined, or disadvantaged. So it's about trying to, in a wider sense, creating an environment where people are really bought in to the organization and its purpose, and therefore their role and their purpose within it.
Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you.
So if her answers her own framework, we don't need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get on to my favorite question, is there any question that we haven't asked you that you would like to answer for our viewers and listeners?
Oh, goodness. That's a really good question. Anything that I would like to answer?
I'd love to claim credit for it. I stole it off of Stephen Bartlett. So thanks, Stephen.
What's the question that you would really like to be asked? I think that probably it would be about what does really good leadership look like? Like so I've talked about, we have this blueprint of, what a leader looks like. And funny enough, it's kind of Trump and it's Hitler and some of those. For me, that's probably the question. Do you want me to answer it as well?
Yes, please, absolutely.
Answer the question I've asked.
Yeah, you can't leave us on that cliffhanger. Yeah.
For me, there's a brilliant book actually, which I don't know if you've come across, which is called "Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders?" And How to Prevent It. And I love this book because it's written by a guy, and I think that in itself is really important, because I think otherwise it could be seen as man bashing if a woman had written it. It's based on sort of science and research as well, which is evidenced in the book, which is also great. And it's really about the need for us to shift our perception about what leadership is and how we recruit and we develop and we promote. And it's really about this sense that it's not about men or women. It's exactly what we talked about, that it's about male traits and about female traits, and understanding that really what people want to be led by and how people thrive, where people thrive the best in organizations, is in a female trait environment. So that's not about having lots of women. It's exactly what we talked about. It's about allowing the guys to bring out those female traits, which I do positively believe that they have, but are discouraged from showing. So it's about the teamwork element, the collaborative element, rather than the competition all the time. It's about the listening. It's about the sense of belonging, and those tend to what we class as female traits, and albeit, like I said, I think men absolutely can have them too. And it's about dialing down the aggressive, assertive, charismatic, confident leader that we sort of tend to recruit and hire against, and is what we describe when we sort of describe leadership. So I'm not going to claim credit for designing that. I think that book in itself is the perfect essence of it. I think for me, it's about how do we bring that into reality. That's what I'm interested in, and that's the conversations I have of, okay, that's all well and good, but how do we make that happen? How do we have the conversations that create that space and allows the dialing up of the female traits and the dialing down of the very alpha traits, which science absolutely supports? People want to work for the female traits and do better, and those teams perform better when you have more of those female traits. So for me, that's what the blueprint should start to look like. And it's creating that safe space that men can take off those masks, dial down the alphaness, not be seen like a girl's blouse, and actually instead be seen like, oh my God, that makes you a fantastic leader of people. And that's what will get the most results and the most success in an organization. And if we just get over ourselves, because really that's what we need to do, need to get over ourselves in relation to those traits. That's your blueprint. That's the future.
Yeah, I love that. And and history backs you up on it. Have you read the book Good to Great?
Yes.
I can't remember who it's by.
Jim Collins.
That's it. Thank you. But that talks a lot in the opening framework of what propelled good companies to great companies. Every time the leadership style was exactly how you described.
Yeah. And I just don't know why we just can't get it.
No.
That's the bit I'm baffled by that. And I think if I could find the answer to that, because I just don't understand why we just don't understand that that's the case. Like you say, so much evidence backs that up. But what happens is what gets into the media, what gets put in front of us is Trump or, Steve Jobs, let's face it, who was really documented as not being great as a leader, but also not particularly nice. Those kind of leaders are the things that get out. And you're right, in Good to Great, absolutely what Jim Collins demonstrates is that these are not the leaders that are on the front of Fortune 500, but actually are the ones that are being most successful overall. So
amazing. Right. Well, I'm really intrigued now for my question, because we've talked about a lot of books today. So I'm going to do my Desert Island Discs bit and ask you to give us one book, one piece of music, and a tool or framework that has really inspired your game that you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers.
The book is difficult because there's lots, but I would say generically anything by Patrick Lencioni. Big fan of Patrick Lencioni and his works. I think there's a lot of really good stuff. If I had to pick one of his books, probably The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I think that I use it a lot, and I think that it's an old one, but it's a good one, a bit like Good to Great. These stand the test of time for a reason. So I would say 5 Dysfunctions of the Team would be the book. The framework, where I'm going to go with the framework is actually the chimp paradox. So maybe less of a framework, but more of a understanding of how the human brain works and how humans operate. And again, I use that a lot because I think in that understanding why people do what they do and what's going on in any one situation and how that brain is operating, I think is really, I've seen light bulbs go on with individuals often when I talk about that, and it's quite a simple one, but I think it's great. So I use that a lot. A piece of music. Give me some parameters for the piece of music in terms of.
Oh, everybody cheats.
Everyone cheats on this. So so people have some people have given us a track, like it was the first dance or something at the wedding, but a lot of people say I can't possibly do that.
They've given us whole genres.
So I'll give you a genre or an artist.
Oh no, I'm not prepared. No, I'm not willing to cheat. I guess it's
good.
I'm very much that perfectionist and wanting to get things right. Says to me, I want to answer the question correctly, hence the clarification. Like many, there will be lots of pieces of music. I'm a big fan of an artist called Freya Ridings. I love her work. It's very deep. I listened to her album called Freya Ridings on repeat when I was writing my first book because I can absorb myself in her music and it not distract me from what I was doing. And also it's lots of different emotions in there, so that was helpful. To pick a single track, I would have to say Lost Without You by Freya Ridings would be a track that I would sort of go to as my default. Lots of emotion as an empath. That really connects with me. And like I said, I can work to that and listen to it and listen to her work in general. So that's probably the one.
Lovely. Amazing. Well, we're going to put links to all of those recommendations in the show notes and your books.
Thank you.
It's going to be a link fest, this one, because we've mentioned so many books. You've got your own books. So drop down into the show notes, people. Loads of links there for you to go and explore and get inspired a bit further. Now, Jenny's going to be shocked now because we're about halfway through this season and I've forgotten this one every single time. Until now, we've got a new question for this season of the podcast to finish off. And that is, do you have a motivational quote or saying that you come back to over and over again?
Oh, goodness. I'm sure I do, but I need to then think about what it is. A motivational quote that I come back to. It's quite interesting. The reason I'm looking up is I have stuff on my wall. Actually, I have a gallery wall in front of me, and I have stuff on my wall. Like, for example, "feminist is my second favorite F word," is one of the motivational quotes that I have on my wall, which I think says everything about me. Because I think it's really like, in talking about the topics that I do, people think automatically, some of the sort of the crap and the pushback you get is that you can't possibly be a feminist, and it's like, I can be a feminist and also support men. I think, again, we need to understand that in society. So that probably is one of them, because I have it actually up on my wall.
I love it.
So yeah, that's probably a main one for me. I'm trying to think of a sort of particular quote that I would have. I used to have lots of them written on my board. Actually, again, this is an insight into my life. I have a perspex wall that I write on in my house, that people think I'm nuts for
You're
having.
quite jealous, aren't you?
I
It's
am
a
quite jealous.
whole wall
I've got
yeah.
I've got perspex wall envy right now.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's in my lounge area, and it just means that you can stick stuff to it, but you can also write on it with like whiteboard pen, but without it being a nasty whiteboard. So I used to have quite a lot written on there, but I don't. I rubbed them off that not long ago because I needed the whole space for something I was doing. So yeah, I'm going to struggle with that. I think I think my feminist is my second favorite F word, is probably.
I think it's a winner.
And so I imagine your first one would be something like frankincense, or
Yeah, oh, absolutely, especially at this time of year. Yeah, it's
absolutely,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can't think of what the alternative would be.
absolutely.
This episode is going to be the first one in the new year, so let's wish our listeners a happy new year.
Yes, happy new year,
Fantastic.
everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today and being so open and sharing so much with us. It's been really great.
It's been wonderful to be on. Thank you for some awesome questions, and the opportunity to really explore the topic. I really appreciate your time.